There's nothing quite as terrifying as being lost, especially when every road you take feels like it's leading you somewhere you shouldn't be. Today, we're diving into a chilling story that reminds us all to trust our instincts, because sometimes a wrong turn can lead you straight into a nightmare. Story number 1. It was supposed to be a simple road trip for Zoe, her boyfriend Jack, and their two friends, Lily and Ethan. They had planned a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin in the mountains, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. But what started as an exciting adventure quickly turned into a terrifying ordeal that none of them would ever forget. The group was only a few hours away from their destination when they hit a massive traffic jam. Impatient and eager to reach the cabin before sunset, Zoe suggested they take a shortcut. Jack hesitated, but with the GPS showing an alternate route through some back roads, they figured, why not? What could go wrong? The road started off normal, just a bit rough and narrow. But as they continued, the trees thickened and the sun dipped lower, casting long, eerie shadows. They hadn't seen another car or person for miles. It was like the forest had swallowed them whole. Lily nervously glanced at the GPS, but it had lost signal. They were officially off the grid. With no way to tell where they were going, Jack suggested they turn back. But when he tried to make a U-turn, the car's tires skidded and they got stuck in the mud. After multiple failed attempts to get the car unstuck, they decided to look for help. They left a note on the windshield, hoping someone might find it if they weren't back by morning, and started walking. The forest was unnaturally quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant snap of twigs. As night fell, the darkness felt heavy, almost oppressive. That's when they saw a faint light flickering through the trees. Relief washed over them, thinking they'd found a house, a place to call for help. But as they got closer, the house looked more like an old, decrepit cabin, barely holding itself up. Ethan knocked, but there was no answer. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was thick and musty, and the walls were covered in strange symbols that looked like they'd been scratched in with claws. They were old, rotting furniture pieces and a table set with moldy dishes, as if someone or something had been expecting company. Zoe's flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, she swore she saw movement in the corner of the room. Jack dismissed it as her nerves playing tricks, but Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Just when they were about to leave, the door slammed shut behind them, and the lights went out. Panicked, they scrambled to find the door, but it wouldn't budge. The scratching sound grew louder, echoing from all directions. In the pitch black, they heard a voice low, raspy, and in a language none of them understood. In a desperate attempt, Jack managed to break a window, and they crawled out one by one, sprinting back into the forest. They ran until their legs gave out, collapsing in the mud just as the first hints of dawn broke through the trees. They eventually found a road and flagged down a passing truck. When they told the driver about the cabin, he went pale. He told them no one had lived in that area for decades. Those cabins were abandoned through a series of strange disappearances, and locals had long avoided the place, claiming it was cursed. The group finally made it to the cabin they had originally booked, but they were too shaken to stay. They left that day, vowing never to take a shortcut again. Story number 2. Samantha was driving alone late at night on a long, winding road trip back home from visiting her sister. She was used to the drive, but on this particular night, she was running late. She had taken an unfamiliar back road, hoping to shave off some time. It was just supposed to be a shortcut. The road was empty, with no lights, no signs, and no other cars in sight. It was just her, the hum of the engine, and the radio static she couldn't quite tune out. The GPS had started glitching, showing her on a road that didn't even seem to exist. As Samantha drove deeper into the night, she noticed a figure on the side of the road, hunched over and waving. It was an old man, his clothes torn and covered in mud, like he'd been walking for miles. She hesitated but decided to stop. After all, it was late, and he looked like he needed help. The old man's voice was shaky as he thanked her and asked for a ride to the nearest town. He said his truck had broken down further back, and he'd been stranded for hours. Against her better judgment, Samantha agreed. She unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in. They drove in silence for a while, the old man staring straight ahead, barely blinking. Samantha tried to make small talk, but he only responded with short, cryptic answers. After about 20 minutes, he pointed down a narrow, unmarked road and told her to turn. She hesitated, feeling uneasy, but he insisted. "It's a shortcut," he said, "a quicker way to the main road." Samantha reluctantly followed his directions, but as they continued, the road narrowed even further, and the trees grew denser. It felt like they were being swallowed by the forest. Minutes felt like hours as the road twisted and turned. The unease in Samantha's gut turned into dread. She finally asked the old man how much farther they had to go, but he didn't answer. When she looked over, she saw something that made her blood run cold. His reflection in the window wasn't right. His eyes were completely black, and his skin seemed to be peeling away, revealing something darker beneath. Panicking, Samantha slammed on the brakes, but the car skidded and stalled. She turned to confront him, but the passenger seat was empty. Samantha jumped out of the car, her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone in the middle of nowhere, the silence around her thick and unnerving. She tried to start the car again, but it wouldn't budge. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on gravel, coming closer. In a blind panic, she grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. The footsteps grew louder, and she saw a shadow moving towards her, slow and deliberate. She ran into the woods, branches scratching at her skin, her lungs burning with every breath. Samantha stumbled upon an old, decrepit village hidden deep within the woods. The houses were abandoned, doors hanging off their hinges, windows boarded up. But there was something wrong. She could hear whispers, low and haunting, like they were coming from the walls themselves. She kept running, but no matter where she turned, the village seemed endless, looping in on itself. She saw shadows darting between the buildings, figures that were there 1 second and gone the next. It was as if the entire village was alive, watching her every move. Just as dawn began to break, Samantha found a road that seemed to lead out. She followed it, sprinting until she finally reached a familiar highway. A passing trucker pulled over, and she managed to get a ride back to town. She never found out what that village was or who or what the old man really was. But locals later told her that the area she had been in was known for strange disappearances, and the village she described hadn't been inhabited for over 50 years. Samantha's story is a reminder. Sometimes a wrong turn, and just an accident, hits a doorway to something much darker. So next time your GPS suggests a shortcut, maybe it's better to stay on the main road. Story number 3. Jenny and Mark had been dating for 2 years, and this road trip was supposed to be their first real adventure together. They were heading to a secluded campsite in the mountains, a place where they could disconnect from the world and just enjoy each other's company. But the GPS had other plans. Halfway there, the GPS suddenly rerouted, suggesting a faster way through a series of back roads. They were eager to arrive before dark, so they didn't think twice about taking the detour. What started as an excited drive quickly turned into a confusing maze of identical roads and dense, silent woods. Jenny noticed the first red flag, an old, withered sign that read "No trespassing." She pointed it out, but Mark brushed it off, thinking it was just for some private property nearby. They continued driving, but the road seemed endless, stretching on without a single turn-off or landmark dot. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they started seeing things: broken down cars covered in vines, abandoned houses with shattered windows, and strange, twisted trees that seemed to reach out like skeletal hands. The road was getting worse, riddled with potholes and cracks. They should have turned back, but it was already too late. They finally reached a small, run-down village. There were no people, no lights, just rows of old houses that looked like they'd been forgotten for decades. Mark tried using his phone to check the map, but there was no service. The entire place was cut off, isolated from the rest of the world. Desperate to find someone who could give them directions, they decided to get out and explore. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood and the rustling of leaves. Every house they passed had its windows boarded up, and the doors were locked tight, but the strangest part, each house had a candle burning in the window, flickering with an unnatural blue flame. As they wandered through the village, they saw a figure standing at the end of the street. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned black dress, her face obscured by a veil. Jenny called out to her, but the woman didn't respond. She just pointed down the road and slowly faded into the fog. Jenny and Mark followed, hoping she was leading them out, but the fog grew thicker with every step, swallowing the village whole. Soon, they found themselves back at their car, confused and disoriented. It was like the village had rearranged itself, trapping them in a never-ending loop. They tried to leave, driving down the road they came from, but every time, they ended up right back where they started. The village was toying with them, bending reality in ways that defied all logic. No matter which way they turned, every road led back to the same spot, the same eerie houses, the same blue candles. Exhausted and terrified, they decided to spend the night in the car. But sleep was impossible. They kept hearing whispers low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from all around them, yet nowhere at all. The blue flames in the windows flickered more intensely, casting strange shadows that danced like figures on the walls. At dawn, Mark noticed something on the back seat, a map that hadn't been there before. It was old, yellowed, and covered in strange symbols, but there was one clear path drawn in red ink. With no other options, they followed it, hoping it would lead them out. The road was rough and barely drivable, but finally, they saw the highway in the distance. They sped back onto the main road, hearts racing, not daring to look back. When they finally reached the nearest gas station, they tried to explain what had happened. The clerk listened quietly, then simply shook his head. "You're lucky you made it out," he said. "Most people who take that road never come back." Jenny and Mark never figured out what that village was or how it managed to trap them in a nightmarish loop. They only knew one thing for sure: they would never stray from the main road again. Because some wrong turns don't just get you lost. They keep you lost. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. And remember, when your GPS takes you somewhere unexpected, sometimes it's better to turn around.